All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for coming to the second part. I guess I want to start off with if anyone had any questions or kind of wanted to see anything. I've had one request to just kind of basically run it from the command line, which is actually quite useful because if you're doing anything with a continuous integration server like Jenkins, you might want to just have your Jenkins when it detects a change, gets pushed to Git or your version management system to just kind of kick off a build and run the test automatically. And so you would basically have a command line in Jenkins to do that. But basically, it's as simple as just kind of typing in bundle exec. In case you might have a lot of different versions of various gems running, the bundle exec basically will execute with just the gems that are directly listed in the gem lock file. Then the next thing you type would be cucumber, which is just run the cucumber command. And then there's some other options of things that you can do. If you only want to run, for example, one scenario, you can type in that exact feature file. And then you can give it a line number. Then you also need to tell it what root to look in for all your cucumber related files. And in this case, it's just features as well. So when I run this, it should work.
What is the line number?
The line number is 6. So this is just from the feature file that I'm trying to run one particular thing out of. Yep, and yeah, I've got some gems that I guess I need to update. Then apparently it doesn't like that, so something else is going wrong here. Oh, doesn't like that either. Oh. Okay, so what was actually going wrong was I was pointing at the wrong feature file. So the one that I was actually looking at here was in a different folder. Oh. Okay, yeah, I had to update Chrome, or had to change it to Chrome as well because Firefox is actually broken. So let's try that one more time. And this looks like there was an exception. So it says it was unable to locate an element. So we can kind of just sort of trace that and see what went wrong. So if we look at workshop line number 13, it's looking in the browser for a text field with the name of first name. So if we just open up Chrome, we can actually just kind of go there. And kind of sort of see what might have gone wrong. So we're going to the registration page. So all that's doing is clicking the register tab up here. So if we click that, we see some information pop up. And with our web tools, we can inspect that field and see what the name is. Actually, I think it was that field. So we do have the first name field. So what might have happened here is, could have been like a race condition that just happened, whereas it goes to the page, but the page doesn't load in time. So usually something that's good to do is sort of like wait to make sure your page is loaded. And with water, one of the ways you can do that is let's see if that works. Another way you could wait is with a sleep. However, sleeps are somewhat kind of dangerous to use because they're not really necessarily going to be correct, because like if the page loads under 3 seconds most of the time, and you'll run a test and you have it just arbitrary sleep for 5 seconds. Well, there might be a couple cases where it takes longer than 5 seconds, so your test will fail when it probably really shouldn't. So if we can just kind of like wait for like some particular information to appear on the page that we know should be there that would signal that the page is done loading, then we should be good. And of course, it helps to get the syntax correct. So the water wait until takes a block for the truth condition, and so it'll just wait until this evaluates to true. So basically, all it's doing is it's taking the browser and looking for a text field with the first name and just waiting until that exists.
What's the question mark?
The question mark is it's like part of the method name. So in some places in Ruby, there's a kind of a convention that, like, if a method's going to return a true or false value, it'll basically have a question mark at the end of it to kind of sort of hint at what the expected return value would be. And then, of course, something else breaks. Let's see. And there's like a stale element, which basically means something refreshed while water was checking it, which is kind of unfortunate, or kind of annoying, but let's see if it runs or see if it passes when we run it again. Nope. Okay, so we'll go to 25. Anyway. Anyway, so generally this is kind of something that sometimes happens, like when a page transitions. Well, so I guess in this case, there's like a couple things that we could do to sort of get around this exception. We could, well, let's just kind of retry while it's sort of transitioning out. I was actually not quite expecting to run across this with just kind of this sort of page. But in general, that's just kind of how you would run Cucumber from the command line. You can also just run the whole suite, like all your tests, just by using bundle exec Cucumber features. There's also tags. There's like also like a couple operators you can use, like such as tags, that you can basically give. You can basically indicate which ones you actually want to run. So in this case, I can tag a couple scenarios with run me, and then tell it to use that tag. And it should just run those. So, do you remember enough of? So, what all can you remember about tags that we kind of went over last Saturday?
You can tag at different levels.
Okay, good.
Specify tear up and tear down.
Okay, like in it's like over here in like these before and after hooks. Cool. Can anyone think of like how, like using a tag, like how using tags could kind of help make, like how you would be able to manage your test suite better if you had a lot of sort of developers working on a lot of projects, and you had a lot of acceptance criteria that you maybe would want to like not run the whole suite every time during development.
So if you knew you were only dealing with like these 5 pages or something like that, you could give a tag whatever you were dealing with, I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You have like a bug number or something you could tag.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if the test was really only good for validating whether that bug was fixed or not.
Yeah, if you kind of wanted to sort of like narrow down like the scope of the suite. So like if you say you had like a couple thousand scenarios, but you're only working on one small feature that like impacted maybe like a couple, that would like have a couple scenarios that you would basically sort of just use to describe the functionality of that feature, you could just basically narrow down and just kind of run those. There's also tag negation. So basically, to kind of negate running a tag or using a tag to sort of like filter down the scenarios, you can use the tilde and then the tag name. And so this is going to run a bunch more stuff because there's a lot of scenarios that don't have broke on them. So it actually looks like if you basically say tags run me and not broke, that I think that is essentially doing a logical OR between them. So it'll either be tagged with run me or not broke. And basically, I think doing this should give you a logical AND. So if you do with like dash tags run me, and then dash tags not broke, it only runs the ones that you have tagged that are not also tagged with broke. Whereas if you just use the comma, it would kind of would have like a lot larger reaching of things to get. So or everyone's experiences using water. So like anyone have time to like play around with it over the week?
If someone interested in blogs on page object, it's like 5 blogs that will show you how it was developed over time.
Mm-hmm.
So I did get through that. I just, I'm really weak on my Ruby right.
Okay.
So I've kind of cut and paste some examples of the example set that you have and just try to understand it as I go along.
Okay. Do you want to, or would like it be good to kind of continue kind of looking at some more examples with water, or would you want to like sort of like as a group move on to look a bit at page object and that pattern?
Maybe we can do another one and then move on to the next thing.
Okay.
Do another example.
Another example? Okay. So what example would you like to see? Okay.
Does that form have validation? So if you don't fill in a required field,
This,
see if like something shouldn't work.
to just get like a normal exception?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can do that.
Then there's also a scenario attempt to create a new user without all the recorded data. And I still get an error when the application asks for missing. Then the user is not created. I didn't know how to handle that inside of Ruby. If that makes sense.
Okay. So generally, it's like one thing you could, like in that case, like you could think of like, okay, kind of like consider like if you're a user and you like entering, information, but it's like invalid. Like as far as you've probably done everything right, but in terms of the application, it's kind of up to the application at that point to communicate to you that, the information that you've given, like, it's not all actually there, or it might need some other stuff. So what you could do in that case is kind of like assume that if you had entered invalid information, you could sort of like assume that there'd be an error message there that you could look for, or that you would still be on the that page. Or additionally, you could also, if you're kind of sort of validating, you could also kind of check to make sure that if you're trying to make sure that you're not actually getting through with invalid information, you could also kind of check to sort of like make sure that you're not on like the confirmation page. So for example, here we've got like a refute match, which basically, which basically is kind of like the opposite of assert. So it's basically it'll basically raise an exception if it does if it like encounters this in the browser text.
So the exception I was getting in the command line is probably wrong.
Probably. What was do you remember the exception?
Well, it build one scenario and it build one step. It's saying, expecting thank you for registration, do not match home flight with development for cruises, destination, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, it's still talking about this. When the user account is not created, then the user's account is not created. It just fails right there.
Yeah, that sounds like you've actually got a valid failure then.
So it actually works like
Yeah.
that. But the thing I was wondering about is the scenario build too. It looks like because of that. So if you run that scenario, does it fail on yours?
Yeah, it's failing on mine, but it's failing for like a different reason. It's got like some weird issue with I think the driver going on.
Could I bring this up for a second? Just have to look at it?
Yeah.
Because I can't, I think this is an error. Apology to the class.
Oh, that's all right.
I think this is an error. I'm just not sure. So this is it over here. These are a lot of the scenarios. This is the last one. Attempt to create a new user without all the required data. And that's where
Yeah,
I'm
that's
at.
actually, so here we've got the, actually, could we plug this into like the projector and we can just kind of show the rest of the class? Let me just kind of recreate what he's seeing just in the terminal. So basically I'm just requiring the WebDriver gem, creating a new browser, gonna go to the test website. Gonna click the register button. And right now I'm just kind of like walking through what the script would be doing. And so, okay, so here's where he's getting the, or here's where the exception's being encountered. Let's see if I have refute. Okay. There's a few gems that I need to just kind of pull into this IRB console to actually get it to work. Or not. Okay, well, anyway, looks like I'm having some difficulty actually getting it to display that match as well. Guess this is a good example of why you would want to run through stuff the morning, earlier in the morning before, so you can kind of figure out how to address some of these issues. So that's my bad. Okay, I'm just gonna reach in here and just steal it. Just drop it in my terminal. So you have to steal a few more methods too. Yeah, you can usually just, a lot of times, like if you include a gem, that'll sometimes work. But in this case, there's I think some other stuff that's going on that I haven't really dug that much down into mini tests. So I'm just kind of brute forcing stealing all these methods and just kind of dumping them into my IRB session. Which generally is not like something you would necessarily do, but just kind of quickly trying to show you what the message would look like. Okay. Okay, this way is kind of also not going very well. Yeah.
I don't wanna
Oh,
distract your train of thought or anything, but this is kind of a question that might be relevant right now.
okay.
I noticed, it looks like you're like going through the source code to like determine what functions do and like what's available to you.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that trying to figure out how some of these things work, there usually isn't a lot of documentation, but there's, you know, I'll usually find a few examples of stuff you can do, but if you wanna know like what everything a gem can do, do you like go into the source, or can you explore it in IRB, or
Yeah.
what's the best way to go about it?
So there's so for usually probably the best way is like kind of just like the documentation. I think Minitest has its own place for documentation. But yeah, so what I was doing was I was trying to basically include Minitest gem and have it like set up so that I can basically call refute and not. So that actually might be. Actually, it might not be the best way to kind of find it. So let's try including. Okay, that way it seems like it's just might just take us down kind of like a rabbit hole. And so just trying to get like the refute to work in this IRB console might not be a really good use of time at the moment. But basically, so like when you have like an expectation that would fail.
One people I'm concerned is, should this scenario have failed, or should, because of the refute,
Yes, this scenario
Should have
actually should have failed.
it should have failed?
Right. So basically, so if you're like asserting something, you're kind of like asserting the truth of something. If you're refuting something, you would be basically validating that it's false. So basically, it's saying, I'm expecting this not to be true. And so if you're looking for, or so basically if you're refuting like this, congratulations, you now have an account here. If you're refuting that, that basically means I'm expecting not to see this.
Right. And if that's the case, shouldn't that pass because you didn't see it?
Well, in this case, we are, because we filled out the form with nothing. We click create the account, and it looks like it created an account for us.
Oh.
And so in that case, yeah, so in that case, my, yeah, my,
I see what you're saying.
right.
So you're, okay, it actually,
Yeah,
the
it's,
website believed it created an account, and that's why this is a good test, because it found out that that's not really the case.
right, and
Okay,
yeah, and another thing that could have been done is like you could, asserted that you would see an error message here, like say, like, you could assert a match of, we're sorry we couldn't create your account because there's missing information.
Yep.
Um,
Thank you, Tim. I think I was at the wrong level of my thought there, and you just,
okay,
I looked at the screen, I saw exactly the screen that you saw. I didn't realize that that was the correct screen.
right, sometimes, which also kind of brings up a point of like sometimes like thinking, like when you're running a test, you're a lot of times you're used to kind of, validating something as true, but sometimes when you sort of like switch stuff, like, when you're refuting or checking that something is not, sometimes that can be kind of sort of like hard to kind of change your thinking about. But yeah, no, that was an interesting point. Any other questions? Or Okay. Um, Actually, yeah. Yeah, sometimes like when you're kind of running a test and you get like a exception like stale reference, stale element reference. Um, a lot of times it's like if you'll kind of so yeah, so if you're like running a test and you have like some exceptions, like they'll there might be like an error or there could be an actual failure. The failure is generally going to be include something along the lines of like there'll be expected something in the text, but if there's like an error, that generally indicates that there's something broken with like the test itself. So a lot of times, like when I see something like this, um, you can kind of look in Google for maybe like a possible solution. So here we have like a Stack Overflow thing. This is a different version of Selenium. But basically what they're doing is just kind of like a try-catch block. So all they're doing is trying to click it. They're catching the exception and then just trying again. There's actually a gem. There's actually a gem somebody wrote called Eventually Helper that basically what it does is if there's like an exception or something, it'll just kind of keep retrying it if it's like a standard exception. And really all it does is basically it's just like a wrapper of like a begin loop that just kind of breaks. So let's try including that and seeing if that might help. And again, it's just like a really simple, just a loop that if there's an exception, I'm going to try it again because sometimes with Selenium, this would kind of happen about this would happen and it just basically lead to a flaky test that was more annoying than actually useful. So we'll just do it around the first one because if once we get the first one to actually pass, the second one should be okay because the page should be in a state where it's not actually transitioning or invalidating anything. Oop. And also helps to like actually include the gem that you're trying to run with. Cucumber has this, basically it's a method called world, which will, essentially what it does is it kind of takes your module, and for that run of the Cucumber will sort of like expose, or like make callable all these methods from just kind of like the root context. So in this case, it lets us basically just kind of call that. Cannot find eventually helper. Okay, it sort of doesn't seem to like that either. And yeah, that also, spelling and using the right name is also fairly important. Okay, so it's another sometimes issue with some like libraries that you're kind of using. They'll be running under a context and sometimes don't actually have all the dependencies defined. So here we're kind of getting exception. I was looking for RSpec, but we're not really running in the context of RSpec, so it was kind of throwing an exception when it saw that. So I'm just going to.
Is RSpec an alternative to Cucumber?
RSpec is it's a different. Yeah, it's kind of like it's a different tool. It's yeah, it could probably. There's like a big thick RSpec book that covers it. But yeah, it's a different tool. It's not necessarily behavior driven, but it's kind of more kind of like centered around specification. Eventually, I'll hopefully be able to get this to actually not complain. Okay, there we go. Finally. So what we're actually seeing here is here's our kind of keyword expected. It was basically looking for this like this thank you for registering to not actually be on the page. And then you can also sort of see here what sort of exception it was. It's a minitest assertion, which is another kind of indicator that there was something that we were expecting that was not what we were expecting. Okay. Any questions or anything you would like to see next?
What's the one skip for your tests?
One skip, that I believe is referring just to the step. So like, it got to the exception. It got to the step exception on the. It basically ran into an exception here, and then so it just skipped the last step because it wasn't necessarily in a state where the next step could potentially pass or fail or be useful.
So, in this cucumber syntax, so then that should be a test, and every and after that would be an additional test.
It'd be like an additional assertion.
Okay.
So basically, with like the Gherkin syntax, just to kind of review, given is just going to be essentially setup or sort of indicating what the state's going to be. There'll be when, which will be an action. So in this case, the user is going to the registration page. There's also and, which basically kind of indicates that stuff following that is also part of the what was above. So like here we can have when and. Basically, this indicates that both of these lines are actually part of the setup, or part of the action, not the setup. So basically, the action is the user visits the registration page and applies for an account without enough information. When that happens, when that part of the action happens, then will be the assertion part, which will be kind of then and. So then the user account is not created and the application asks for the remaining information. So basically what this is doing is the first step is kind of making sure, or kind of validating that we haven't created an account. And the second part of the assertion is the application is also asking for information that's missing. And since this one failed, like it kind of stops there. And so if there were like if there were exceptions or yeah, if there were exceptions within like any of the steps, like it would just kind of like raise the exception there and abort that scenario and and go on to the next thing.
So it wouldn't run anything else in that scenario, but if we had put that before the other, or before the other scenario, it would still run the other one, right?
Yeah. So the scenarios are separate. So like if one scenario fails, then it stops running that scenario,
Okay.
but it'll keep trying to run the other scenarios.
That proceed it? Like, go after it? Like if we had 2 more scenarios after this?
Yeah. So the way Cucumber treats scenarios and the way that a lot of testing things treat different scenarios and different test things is like each of these scenarios are like standalone things. They shouldn't be setting up state for other scenarios to kind of run off of. Because ideally, I should be able to just kind of grab all my scenarios and run them in any random order, and they should all pass. So yes, it'll stop the one particular scenario that failed, but whatever the other scenarios, it'll keep trying to execute. Cool. Any other questions?
And we could, swap the, when and end as well, right? Could we?
For these,
Like, can we extend? When, yeah, exactly. No, is it? No. No, I was wondering, if you could extend, given instead of then, so can we write another line for, talking about the status, that's required?
yeah, like we could, instead of like, if we're just kind of assuming that the user will be there, we could just kind of basically do something like that. So
Yeah.
we can just kind of use it both as like setup. So yeah, that's one thing. That's a possibility.
That's not very common, is it?
I mean, it kind of it can be. It sort of depends on like the style, or depends on like how like you have a team have agreed to like how what are we going to consider setup? Are we going to consider being on the page as like an assumption that's valid, or do we need to kind of take as part of the action navigating to that page as well? Yeah, but again, like the given, when, and then, like these words are just for our benefit, just for like the human who's looking at this scenario to kind of figure out what it's doing, benefit to kind of make it a bit more readable. Underneath the covers, they don't really actually do anything. You can actually even just basically put a star there, and it'll kind of still know that that's just kind of a step. Mm-hmm. Cool. Cool. Okay. Are there any more, I guess, questions about page object in general, or not page object, water? Okay, we've got about an hour left. So kind of want to, I guess, talk a little bit about page object. So let's actually look at some of the step definitions. So basically, page object kind of came about as a way to abstract the pages you're testing against, so that there's like one place. So basically, there's like a representation of like the application under test that you can basically pull in and interact with, and kind of like have like a page class that you directly talk with, rather than the water driver itself. One of the reasons was that as time goes on, if you have like a lot of tests, and say some things change, like say first name is no longer actually first name, but they decide to go get rid of their camel casing and just kind of do the underscore lowercase for naming stuff. Basically, you'd have to kind of go through and change all those. And with with modern browsers, is doing a control find is like pretty easy, and just kind of replacing all instances of that is like pretty easy. But it can, so now like all of a sudden you'll have like a lot of places that have changed just because of one thing has changed. And if you basically just do like a large replace all find first, there might be also some cases where find first is still camel cased and that's still valid. So it kind of leads to a lot of noise. And then when you go to commit, you'd have like a lot of touches to a file, and it might make it look like a lot of the tests were changing or a lot of the step definitions were changing when in fact it was just like a locator that was being used. So what page object basically does is you define a class that represents a particular page, and in that page, or in that class, you basically define the different elements that you'll interact with, and you'll add functions to kind of interact with pages or interact with the page. Like you might be able to do some assertions or even just kind of data fill. Are you?
Mad skills.
Your mad skills typing? Okay. So let me check out an example. Oop. Oops. Okay. Okay, so here's basically like a really simple example of like a page. This is just the index page. So we include the page object gem, and that actually adds like a lot of stuff for us. There's a whole lot of documentation on that already, so I'll probably not be going too much into all that in depth. So basically, you've got your page object. This is actually just a navigation bar, which actually is another. It's just like a module that, since it appears in a bunch of pages, this is just kind of how I'm like, how this is just being organized right here. So I'm basically, it's kind of like a smaller section that has like a bunch of links. And so just kind of for simplicity and to not repeat myself, I'm just calling it the navigation bar and putting all these definitions in there. So I have to include the page object gem again, just so I get some magic functions like link. So basically what link is doing is it's going to be giving me a couple methods for free just by declaring, like I have a link object or a link element. And so I'll have like the sign-on link. So basically you'll have like the name of what that element will be, you'll refer to it within the page and outside of the page. And then you'll have also like how you're going to locate that element. So locating is kind of, it's like fairly important because this is how page object knows, okay, I have this, you're telling me this name, now where do I go to find it? And so in the future, if say sign-on were to change, like this was, say it was like no longer located by like a text, say it was like lowercase or there's now a space, the only place that would have to change that would be here. And so that'd be it's a lot more concise and cuts down on some of the noise in your versioning system. And so basically, we can actually just kind of pop over to Cheesy's page object on GitHub and actually just kind of look at what this is actually giving us for free. Take a look at the wiki and look at the elements. And so if we look at the link, so basically it kind of tells us some useful, huh?
No, he made a comment about cucumber and cheese coming together, and that's why.
Yeah, no, there's like I think Cucumber and Cheese is like I think it's like a book. Yeah, it's actually a book.
Yeah.
Yeah, the guy who wrote this page object gem, I think he's up in Cleveland. I think he works with Lean Dog. But yeah, he wrote a lot of stuff around this page object. Anyway, this is like a Ruby implementation of like the page object pattern. Anyway, so basically what link is giving us for free is we have whatever your name is, and then whenever you call that on an instance of the page, it'll actually just click that link. You can also do like whatever that name was underscore element, and what that'll do is return the like the water or Selenium object. So you can call other methods such as like visible or exists, or get the text from that particular link once you find it, which can be pretty useful depending on what you're trying to test. And then it also kind of shows you like the different ways you can actually locate that particular link. So yeah, I sent an email with like a bunch of these links in there, so they're like pretty useful reference material. And if you haven't read them, just know that there exists, and if you want to figure out, okay, I have a button, how do I actually declare a button, and what can I do? Oh, look, it's right here. But yeah, the button and link, they have like a couple elements. Checkbox, there's like a lot of generated methods it'll give you. Like you'll have check and unchecked, and then it can also sort of see, is it checked, and it'll return true or false. So anyway, back to here. So basically that's kind of what's going on here. This is sort of telling page object that, hey, I've got all these links, and then page object's going to be like, okay, here you go. If we go to a page that actually has some more interesting stuff on it, like the registration page, we see here that we're just including the page object. We're including the navigation bar, and yeah, like as you have like a lot more pages, like one thing you can do is you can basically just have like a super class that you just include the page object in, and have like a lot of common stuff that would be across all pages, such as like ways for filling a page, like filling out the data or getting particular information, and you can actually just kind of subclass that with whatever your actual page name is. I'm just kind of using base page as an example, and then you wouldn't actually need to directly include page object here because it's already would have already be included in, excuse me, in your base page class. Okay, so the next thing we can see is we have this page URL, which basically is just saying, this is the URL that my page is going to be. It's really mostly useful if you are using it to like visit the page, because then this is what the page factor will use to actually go there. It'll actually visit this link instead of just kind of instantiating the current page and returning that object. So here we actually have some other stuff. We've got some text fields. We've got the first and last name for the registration page, as well as we've got username, password, and the password confirmation. So if we go over here, again, we can just like open up our Chrome inspector, and it makes it super easy to go through a page and find how to actually access the different elements on the page. And so here we've got first name for the first name, and under contact information, and we can see that it matches. So text field gives you some other stuff. So basically you've got the text field, which just returns whatever's there. You've got this assignment operator method, which basically just lets you put values there. And you also have the standard underscore element, which just returns that object. And there's like a bunch of ways that you can look for it too. Does that making sense? Like any questions about what all page object's doing at the moment? Okay. So we also have, so there might be some cases where there'll be like an element that doesn't actually fall under like one of the standard ones page object gives you for free. But in that case, you can basically just use this element, give it a name, give it what kind of tag it is, and then like how you're going to find it. And that's really only basically using that declaration. Let's see if it's actually documented here. Nope. So basically that's just going to give you some basic stuff like, let's see if we can find it. Oh, that's not it. Oh, yeah, I believe you'll mainly get like the underscore element, which you can actually do interactions with, that, such as like click. So here we've got the register element, and we're just actually clicking it when we're trying to register, because it's if we actually look at it, it's a kind of weird, it's basically just like an input that kind of looks like a button, but it doesn't actually have a type. Yeah, it's just an image. And so alias methods just like actually are just kind of like a Ruby thing. Basically, what it's doing is, so whatever like page object would have given us with like just the register method, what it's actually doing is saying, okay, I'm gonna call that register method just old register in case I want to use it again. And then what I'm actually doing is here is just kind of redefining what that register method would do. And in this case, I'm just going to click it. So that's kind of like a trick that may or may not come up for you, just kind of depending on how you're naming your methods.
I'm sorry, could you go over that alias again? I guess I don't know what it'd be used for.
So here, so page object, like when we're declaring this element, this register element, generally what'll happen is it'll create a register method and a register underscore element method. And so what all that's happening right here is we're just kind of preserving that initial register method that page object creates with the name, old method.
Override that.
Right, and then we basically override that method with this new definition. This is not necessary. This probably isn't really that necessary, but it might be useful if we wanted to use the actual register method that page object gave us at some point later. So that's all that's doing. Okay, so and then if we just kind of take a look at how the step definitions themselves has changed, notice that we have a lot of this at current page class variable popping up a lot of places. That's actually something that page object sort of gives you for free with this page factory module. All the page factory module is doing is it's giving you, why can't I find that? Basically, it's giving you methods like on and visit, which are specific to page object, and they set up the current page variable. So here, if we just kind of go down, it's like I had this step that says, given an unregistered user, I give it a username and password, and then I basically call visit index page. So what's happening here is this is a page factory method that we brought in by including the page object page factory. And so we basically tell it a page object that we want to visit. And so if we kind of take a peek inside here, we've got this page URL. So what's happening is when I call visit index page, it's actually going to, in the browser that was set up at the beginning of, and like one of the before hooks, it's actually going to visit with the browser this page. And then once it does that, it creates a new instance of the index page and assigns it to current page. So what that lets you do is lets your step definitions be a lot more flexible too, because now I could basically be on any page that that basically responds to the registration button or registration link, and then I can basically go there. Whereas with if I were just to basically use the block form of the visit page, which is also like a valid thing to do. I could also kind of basically use a block when I'm visiting the page, and it'll actually also, with an instance of that page, basically visit the registration page, or visit registration. I've seen, in the past, I've kind of seen that sort of happen in some places, and that's happened in some not places. But actually, oh wait, yeah, here, on the registration page. So basically, okay, so let's back up a little bit. We have this step when the user visits the registration page, which all it's doing is it's basically clicking the registration button or registration link on whatever page it's on, and then it's calling another page factory method, which sets up the current page to be on the registration page. Now, so what's a bit different between the visit and on isn't actually going to change the browser. It's going to leave it at the current page that it's already at. But what on does do is it just creates a new instance of the registration page and replaces the current page with that. So now when I'm down here, if I'm assuming this step happens after when the user visits the registration page, whenever I'm referring to current page, it's actually an instance of the registration page instead of an instance of the index page. Does that make sense?
It's like resetting your context.
Kinda.
Just swapping it out.
Kinda. So like right here, like during our test, we've got like this browser variable and the current page variable. And so what current page is going to be basically is current page is literally going to be your current page. And so it'll have whatever methods actually exist with it. And you can basically interact with it. So basically, it kind of acts as like a layer on top of the WebDriver. And so it's kind of, instead of directly interacting with the web page, you're using your representation of the page to actually drive those interactions.
Yeah.
So do you recommend we page object all the things? Is there like a time and place for one and a time and place for the other?
Yeah, generally, it kind of sort of depends on like what your project is. If it's like a really small project where it's not really going to need to be maintained, which generally is kind of like a false assumption, because if you have a project, generally it's going to be something that's probably going to be, someone's probably going to look at it in a couple months anyway, just because that's, usually what happens with projects and companies. They don't like, doing a project and then just throwing away because they decided they want to go a different direction. Generally, using the page object pattern is like a good practice to kind of get into the habit of. So I would recommend it, yeah. Excuse me. And so, like, also, I've kind of seen in the past where people might do something like this. And this is like actually valid in this is like actually like a valid thing to do. Like you can just pass like you can basically just like pass the block while you're on a page or visiting a page to kind of use like this variable, which would be like essentially your current page. But kind of one of the downsides of doing that is now your step has kind of gotten a bit more tied to being on a particular page. So if you've got some common things that can happen on a lot of different pages, such as just kind of generic data fill, then all of a sudden you'd have a lot of fairly similar steps to basically do the same thing. So generally that's something you kind of want to avoid. Because like even in this case, it's like what we're doing here, like this can actually be cleaned up by kind of making the data entry a bit more generic. And instead of directly calling out, okay, first name, last name, username, password, confirm password, enter all that stuff in line by line, there's actually like probably not really gonna have time to cover today, but there's like also a similar gem that Cheesy also put out called Data Magic, which kind of handles some of the data fill for you. I've used it a little bit. It's fairly decent. I've been in projects where we just ended up having to roll our own data class itself, or data class as well. But for the purposes of just kind of learning about Cucumber and BDD, that might be like a topic for a different time, or for maybe even just follow-up emails. But so you could basically have like a generic method like current page.populate, and then you pass in a hash with your field value pairs, and then what it would do is just kind of look through that hash and kind of match up the fields to like the fields that class that page knows about, and just kind of would fill them in that way. And so that way you could kind of make this like a lot more kind of like generic, so you could pass in different information types. Because like right here, all we're doing is we've actually just kind of got it checking to see, okay, do I have information or not enough information? And it's just kind of doing something really quick and dirty. But if you're testing different permutations of what data is being filled in, a lot of times like people will have like the data source live outside of the step definition, such as in like a YAML file, and have like basically this be a key to go to the YAML file and grab like a certain set of information to pass to that method to kind of fill in information. And it kind of cuts down on, or kind of makes the steps a bit more reusable. Yeah, that was the gem name, Data Magic.
So he writes about a concept called default data in his blog.
Uh-huh.
Would that be a follow-on to that kind of concept?
Yeah, that would kind of be, because like here we're sort of, here we're not quite using default data,
Right.
but yeah, the data itself, test data itself can be kind of a large topic too. Like when I was working at a different client, we basically, like this was like back kind of when Data Magic was starting to also kind of be worked on. We just had to kind of roll our own like data layer for like validation data and like input data, because there's just so much stuff that we were testing, and we had to deal with stuff like birth dates, and we'd have to figure out, well, we can't have a birth date in here like we can say our first name is Joe, because some of the rules we had to go against were like time sensitive. Like we needed someone who was like under a certain age or over a certain age in order to trigger certain fields to appear on the page. Cool. Okay, so that's basically just kind of the page object being used for like when we're filling the data here. Then the next thing is we can take a look at just in our assertions as well. We basically have this page object instead of the browser. We're getting the text on the page, and then we're basically just kind of stripping out the new line characters and replacing with spaces to kind of check that this message is appearing for the step when we're asserting that the user account is created. So what you could also do for this is, if you're looking for a particular message to appear in a particular part of a page, you could actually go back to back to your page that's representing so this one would be I guess it'd be the confirmation page, which we haven't written yet. But basically you could add you could also add divs and I think paragraphs to kind of narrow down where you're looking for that particular segment of text into. So that way, if you're looking for something to appear in a particular location on the page, you can kind of quickly verify that, okay, I'm expecting to see, like a welcome username if they're logged into the system, like at the top banner. And so you can kind of narrow it down there to see if, okay, it's there, or, oh no, it's not there. Maybe it got put somewhere else on the page. And then there's also the current URL method, which basically is just returning the URL that the browser is currently on. And here all we're actually doing is just kind of checking basically the last part of that URL. We're just checking like that it's on the create account success page instead of, like a create account failure if there's like some validation errors, or just the create account PHP if it got an error and just kind of remained there. Cool. So any questions on any of that so far? No? Nope. Okay. Right.
One thing I'm noticing is your use of regular expressions there
Mm-hmm.
aren't really bringing anything off of the scenario line, right?
Right. So.
It's just there as the mechanism to get to the underlying root code.
I'm sorry. What was the
So
question?
is there anything else on that regular expression usage other than that's how you get to the Ruby that will execute that scenario line?
Well, so the regular expression, this thing right here, basically all this is what I'm using to. This is kind of like the criteria that I'm.
That's the one right above it that I saw on the deck.
Oh, yeah.
That,
Oh,
that's really not being used here other than the mechanism to get to the Ruby code to execute for that scenario.
right. That's what. So this is what, like when you're running Cucumber, it's basically it's basically taking your steps and looking for regular expressions that match the steps, and then when it basically has kind of makes up those match, that's like this is the block of Ruby that it'll actually execute.
Okay. And sometimes you'll, like the calculator example,
Mm-hmm.
you actually have numbers and you're actually going to go pick that up and actually bring it into the code base.
Right. So if you have like capture groups, what Cucumber will basically do is like there'll be like a array of parameters that you can have, and so for each capture group, you'd have basically just another named parameter that you could basically pull in to basically use within that block to say like figure out like basically, okay, if I was just using this as like essentially like a key for some data that I had living in YAML, I could essentially just kind of like use that as the YAML key to just get that data and then interact with it. Cool. Any other questions?
Do you exclusively use Ruby in the work, or do you do any Java work at all with this kind of concept?
I believe there are some Java like behavior-driven development tools.
Behave and things like that, but you've
Yeah.
never touched it yourself?
Myself, no, I haven't touched it.
All right.
So I guess if we just run it, it should pretty much just do the same thing that essentially Water was doing, but instead of using Water, it'll just be using the page object gem. Okay, so this should be our failing scenario, where it still ended up failing for the same reason of it was expecting not to see the thank you for registering, but it did, so it kind of complained about that. So if we can just run the other one too and see what happens. And it just fills it out the stuff, and oh. Okay, and then it passes. As far as debugging, well, I guess, like, are there like any kind of questions as far as like page object in general, or like anything we've covered at all? Like anything you'd like to see a bit more of? Sean's shaking his head back there. Okay. Guess we'll try to do a quick little demonstration of like how you might debug page objects in the command line, because I sometimes do that because it's quicker to just sort of like open up the command line, like try changing a few things, especially if you've got like if you're trying to use XPath to locate something that is like tricky because for whatever reason an element doesn't actually have an ID when it probably should, or something like that. So basically we start out with require water WebDriver. Require page object. And so now if we kind of use environment as kind of a cheat sheet, we can also include page object, page factory, which will let us basically do on or visit. And then let's create a browser. Okay, there's our browser. And then let's see, let's take a look at the registration page, because it's got a bunch of stuff on it. So here you can actually just load the file. Okay. Yeah, here it's just kind of complaining because I tried to do an include and it didn't actually know what navigation bar was yet. So I needed to include the navigation bar helper module too. So now I can just kind of verify that, yep, it knows what registration page is. Okay, so if we take a look at current page, right now it's no. Browser's our browser. So let me pull that to the back. So we can basically say we should be able to just say visit registration page. And there it goes. And so now if we take a look at current page, we actually have stuff there. If we want to look at the text, that was a bad idea. We have all this stuff that gets barfed to the screen. Okay. So let's take a look at this information here. See if there's this like registration blob. I just kind of want to check that it actually shows up and there's some that actually has like useful information. So here we don't actually have anything useful to find it with. Let's see if I can actually just give it a fake ID for now. Okay, so now it's actually got a fake ID, but this is just kind of like a demonstration purpose of. So one thing you can do is you can like edit in your IDE and just like add stuff to it. So say that's a Actually, let's put on the paragraph. That'll probably be easier to get to instead of this embedded font face. Or, yeah. Okay, so I think we can just define a paragraph here. We'll try reloading the file and then just going on to that page. And let's see if it actually picked up this instructions method. Okay, there it is. So now we can see by just doing, just calling current page instructions, it kind of tells us what we are interested in seeing. Thinking it also probably just monkey patch your. I think should just be able to open it up and add a new declaration. We may not need to include page object here. It should already have it because right now we're just kind of reopening the class and dropping in a new declaration. Let's take a look at. See if that's an actual valid tag. Okay, so we can do image. Oh, that's all it returns though, so that's not too exciting. Let's see if there's something else that might be better. Oh, we can just do footer. That already exists. Then if we try doing this, it still has like the old version of that page, so, oh, never mind. It actually got it, so, yeah, so I guess we don't really need to do a reload because we already just changed the class definition here. But so here we can just call footer, and there we have that information as well. So those might be some useful things to kind of do when you're trying to play around with this, and instead of just kind of like having a couple of tests you're trying to run and then. Yep.
I don't know if it's possible. Have you ever seen or tried any, like controlling the browser width? Doing tests for like.
Yes, there is.
Responsive
Yeah, there
things
are.
that are happening, right?
Yeah,
Would it fall under something that you would do with this, or?
You.
Use another tool for that?
I mean, you could. I think you could. Like generally, what I've seen is like like when we're starting up a test, we would have like had. We might like have it tagged with like a specific browser width, or just like have it test with different sizes, and then we would just like have like the before hook when it was initializing the browser, kind of just set the width at that point, and then navigate to places.
So that's a parameter you can. Put in when you're
I
starting it up.
Yeah, I think that might be something you would tell the browser, like the browser object.
Yeah.
Let's ask my friend Google. So yeah, let's see what that does. Yep. Yeah, so you can resize it with just like that. So if you want to kind of test in different resolutions to see if your your CSS is actually, or media queries are working correctly, yeah, you can just kind of do that.
What's the difference between water and selenium?
So water's kind of built on top of selenium. It's got some, like, I think it's got a bit of its own sort of kind of specific stuff to interact with water or with selenium, and selenium has like some other stuff too. Like it's like a lot. It's like I think pretty sure it's like a bit lower level, like with like the browser interaction. So with like some of these, like a lot of these gems are basically kind of building on top of lower levels to kind of make things a bit more abstract and to make it a bit more expressive of like what you're trying to do. But with Selenium, like you might hear Selenium Grid, which is basically kind of basically a way to kind of separate out different running tests or find a particular machine to kind of run on.
I got the impression that they shared WebDriver, which was like the engine that received the commands to get and set information in the browser. Does that sound right?
Well, I think it's the other.
Different way of not having to write the Selenium style code to talk to WebDriver. But I might be wrong about that. That was the impression I got.
Yeah, that's a good question. I was under the impression that WebDriver and Water were just built on top of Selenium. Just do a quick Google search because I don't know the answer off the top of my head. Yeah, I don't actually probably can't give you a really good answer just off the top of my head. Any other questions? Well, I guess we've got like about 10 minutes until time. I think I pretty much covered what I was going after today. So I guess if there's no other questions, thanks for coming out. I guess there's like a Slack that we can join that I'll probably poke my head into. You also have my Gmail, so if you've got like any questions, feel free to just kind of send me an email and I'll do my best to answer it. Yep.
Do you have any gems of wisdom, pardon my pun, that you know now that you wish you would have known in the earlier days of starting out? Off your head?
But yeah, just with some of the earlier projects that we started on, I think we basically had like a suite, like a Cucumber suite that I guess would kind of also be referred to as like a framework. But we kind of refactored it and redesigned it 3 or 4 times, and there's probably still stuff that can be done to make it better. But definitely, I wouldn't reinvent the wheel. I'd like find gems that would do stuff for me already, and then kind of learn how to use those. See who's using what gems to do different things, because that's like a really way to kind of get a lot of stuff working without having to kind of figure out how to kind of re-implement things that other people have already kind of solved. So yeah, that'd definitely be one. Using page objects, definitely. I thought it was like definitely neat the first time that I saw it. And there's some places that they sort of have their own implementation of it, but a lot of those implementations sort of came out of a need of, we need to do something better, and at the time, like they didn't really know of like other page object implementations that were available, or like the implementations might not have done everything they needed to do at the time. Same goes with basically just test data handling. Like, I think when I started, like there really weren't any good gems, so we kind of had to roll our own. And like even some of the ones that did exist, they would really only work with standard fields. And so the company that I was with at the time, we were doing some really weird things with radio buttons to make the experience and make the look and feel the same on like a desktop as well as like a mobile device. And so some of the things that was doing was causing some of the gems, like I think like Data Magic, to not be too happy with. I can no longer auto-populate some of these radio buttons because they're actually like a radio button hidden underneath a div. So like when I would try to fill it in or try to click it, it would complain saying, "Oh, I can't actually click this. There's a div over top of it that would get the click instead." So, I guess those are a few things. Yep.
This was way back to the beginning. Like in the first browser test, we have like the @Firefox tag to specify that you want to run with Firefox.
Uh-huh.
That doesn't seem like how you would probably want to do it if you were testing a whole bunch of browsers, because that would require adding
Right. So.
every tag for every browser.
Right. So yeah. So you can basically you might be able to randomize it, or you can just. A lot of times, what happens is due to like actual browsers support for actually being able to run or actually be able to interact with WebDriver and stuff. Like your mileage may vary. Like there'll be like IE, for example, like has not the best it's not the best when it comes to compatibility. So like you might get some random browser errors that if you're running in Firefox or Chrome, like they might be a bit more consistent.
So you would tag it.
Yeah, you could.
You'd want a special case for IE.
Yeah, or I mean, another thing you could do is like, so right here, actually, pretty much the reason though I have this tagged as Firefox is there's like some other like non-user interface non-user interface scenarios, and that basically just kind of suppresses like opening up a Firefox browser when it's just kind of not actually do anything. So these wouldn't actually even be interacting with it at all. But usually in your environment file or your hooks, you would basically kind of figure out, okay, what browser am I going to test in. A lot of times you could just have like an environment variable that would get set that would say, okay, I'm going to run like these tests, but I'm going to use Firefox, or maybe I'll use IE, or I'll use Chrome for this particular run. So you could definitely kind of
So you could work
take that
with
approach.
something where like you'd have different CI jobs.
Yeah,
Just change the
yeah.
variable.
Yeah, so like, I mean, like you can interact with like whatever environment variables are here. So I've seen like, people could set like a browser type in an environment variable and like a Jenkins job, or just kind of like on a local run, and then that would basically determine what browser is actually going to get used for that particular run of the suites. Cool. Well, I think we're about out of time. Yep.
So we had talked last week about how the Gherkin stuff would be written like with the client.
Mhm.
Right? But you couldn't write the test there because there wouldn't be a thingy to test yet.
Right. So I mean, so at that point you would kind of have like your scenarios, like a draft of the scenarios, and then like as you're kind of developing it, then you would you could either kind of write the tests along the side of development and kind of like ask developers, hey, I've got this widget that I'm probably going to fill out, or you can that could be a conversation with like development and test to kind of figure out how to actually like kind of like the implementation details of actually testing it. Kind of depends on sort of depends on the company too, whether or not it's we have these scenarios, but sometimes like the scenario might not actually be implemented before the feature is implemented. So I've seen that happen sometimes. so it's kind of sort of like up to you of like how it makes sense for your company or your organization to handle it. But generally, like there's kind of like a push to, if you're doing it completely TDD style, like you would have the scenarios run them, they would fail right away because like there'd be nothing underneath implemented, and then you would kind of keep adding like implementation details to the application and the script and the tests themselves to be able to kind of get them green. Well, I guess if there's no more questions, thanks everybody for coming out. And